So yeah, I'm going to go the other way on this movie yet again. And I hope that you will really listen to my points, because I feel they're very accurate. And even if you might not agree with me when you see the film, although I don't think this is a very commercial film, as we'll discuss. I think that, while most critics love the film and probably will continue to, and cinephiles probably will, I think that a lot of regular moviegoers, this is just not for the mainstream, which is a shame. And also, I think Scorsese and company are getting a lot of credit for shining a light on these atrocities done against Native Americans. Yet I feel that they do such a disservice to that community with the way they portray them that I'm surprised they're getting so much credit for this movie, because I think it actually portrays the Osage Nation quite negatively. All right, so let's discuss, and I'll be curious to hear your own thoughts down below. No spoilers, please, if you have had a chance to see the film, because one of the only, I think, rewarding parts of the film are some of the surprises, because it's just, it's an incredible, true story, which it's a shame that a better movie hasn't been made about it. All right, so as I said, critics seem almost universally blown away by Killers of the Flower Moon. However, and as I said, here we go again, but I gotta be honest, I didn't care for the film at all. I actually disliked this movie. And while it might remain a big awards contender, although I feel it'll still get a lot of nominations, but I think this is a bit of a break for Oppenheimer. I didn't like Oppenheimer, but I like Oppenheimer more than this movie. I at least thought Oppenheimer, while a little slow, and again, I think that with a misleading ad campaign, I still enjoyed that film. This film, I think the pacing issues are so bad, and it's also so misrepresented by the ad campaign. It's a tough sit through, and therefore I think that its commercial prospects outside of major cities, where a lot of cinephiles are pretty bad. I knew as soon as the film started it was disappointment. I was like, uh-oh. Because, as I said, the ad campaign is misleading. The ad campaign has made it seem like this is one of Scorsese's iconic crime films. So that's what I was expecting. I love those movies. But instead, it plays like the other movies that Scorsese has made that far fewer people enjoy. So if you were like, Gangs in New York doesn't get enough credit, or what about The Aviator or Age of Innocence? I mean, that's a very small group, but then this movie might be more for you. It also reminded me less of Scorsese's work and more of Terrence Malick's, which might explain why so many critics are enamored with the film. But I have always disliked Terrence Malick's work. I respect him intellectually, and I realize that he is a lauded filmmaker. But I personally think Terrence Malick has no ability. All right, I wouldn't say that about Scorsese, but I'm surprised that I guess I can't comprehend crime movie Scorsese making this, but when I think of his other films, I'm like, oh yeah, it's one of those. All right, so Scorsese and company, by the way, have made this big deal about scrapping the movie and starting over from scratch once it occurred to them that they were making it from the perspective of the white characters rather than the Native American ones. However, having now seen the final product, I would say the film ended up having no perspective. And my biggest complaints about the film, as I said, are the pacing, but that also so little is explained or elaborated upon. I was constantly taken out of this movie by questions, being like, and I wanted to know more about this true story. And so many things just didn't make sense. I think that the people who made the movie, maybe because they started over from scratch, they had felt they knew it because they'd done the research, so they connected the dots. I think it would have behooved them to show it to people who weren't familiar with this. And then maybe there are always people out there who feel it's sophisticated and intellectual to have to connect all the dots yourself. And sometimes it is to a degree, for sure. You certainly don't want to have to hold everybody's hand. But something that I've learned over the years is that sometimes you do need to hold people's hands. I think, you got to make sure that everybody don't make assumptions about what people will be able to connect the dots to and what they'll understand and what their takeaways will be. All right, so as a result, not only are the criminals here depicted as dumb as dirt, but their victims are made to look, not intelligent as well, which is so tragic, because how does that help the Native American cause? To see so many Native Americans willingly go into slaughter is not just shocking, because, again, it really happened, but it comes across as odd because the movie does not deliver any context. The film tries to draw a comparison to the 1921 Tulsa massacre of Black Wall Street, another horrific, tragic part of American history that society has tried to hide and also has not gotten its due. It was touched briefly upon in HBO's Watchmen. And I think, if they wanted to draw that comparison, they should have opened this movie with actually showing that scenario. But I think an important distinction between the Osage Nation situation here and Black Wall Street is that Black Wall Street was its own community. Yet here, to watch the Osage people willingly let so many white people into their community and allow them to stay, despite the clear, obvious signs, at least how this movie presents it, that they're the enemy. I mean, at some points it seems comical. It would be funny if it weren't so tragic and sad. You're like, how are you guys not doing anything? I mean, a more sophisticated movie, I think, would have drawn another parallel and said, what is it about Native Americans culturally, not just their communities, but culturally, that this keeps happening when they come up against white communities, right? Like all the initial settlers who, of course, tragically, to put it mildly, pushed Native Americans off their land, right? Why would these Native American communities not have learned from that experience? Why would they pretty much allow history to repeat itself on a smaller scale, but no less tragic, with the situation that's shown here? I mean, there has to be a sophisticated, sympathetic reason for why it happened twice. But yet Scorsese and his screenwriter, his co-writer here, Eric Roth, they make it seem like these Native Americans simply don't know any better, which I think is really insulting. I think it really, it's very frustrating. All right, so I'll tell you a few of the questions I had watching this movie, trying to avoid spoilers. All right, so why can't the Native Americans access their own wealth? Why was it when they discovered oil, why was their wealth put in a government trust? And why do they have to ask permission to get their money? It reminds me of how women, up until the 1960s, couldn't open a bank account without their husband's permission. I mean, isn't that just nuts? And that's because women were thought to have no ability to handle, they were like kids. They couldn't handle their finances and the responsibility, and they had to be looked after. And that's how, obviously I was able to connect those dots, partially because I know the history of what happened to another group with women in banking. But I felt like that was such a crazy thing to witness. I think the movie should have made it more clear, or at least had like a prologue being like, once they discovered oil on the land, look what the government did. Isn't that horrific? Also, I thought it was weird that, talk about, white people descending on this, being opportunistic and evil. There would clearly be money made to be on the side of the Native Americans. You wish that people would act to do good, but you could make a substantial amount of money acting on the Native Americans' behalf to access their money. No one came up with that idea. But that to me didn't make any sense. That not one person was like, I know, I'll advocate for the group, then I'll get a commission, and then that's a way for that person to go in and get a lot of money. I mean, that didn't make any sense to me. I wish the situation had been explained better. Also, why is there no law enforcement in this area? And again, I'm sure some of you will be like, well, let me tell you, and I can kind of figure it out, but it would, again, take me out of the movie being like, where are the police? And if there are no police, how do they install law and order here? And then why are people willing to live in an area with no law and order? And then also, this was a big one, why do Native American women keep marrying white guys, even though all these white guys are clearly evil gold diggers? I mean, you might think that's a spoiler, but wait until you see the degree to which this happens in the movie. Like, you're just standing there being like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. And why are you not giving me any context that makes it that I can understand the choices that are being made by these Native American characters? Here's another shocker. This is a small thing. I don't know why this is a small thing in the movie, But why is the KKK allowed to openly operate in this Osage town, and they're celebrated by this town to the point that Lily Gladstone's Molly, a Native American, actually says maybe that group can help her? Like, I mean, it's like, how did that happen? How did the KKK misrepresent themselves to such a degree that a person of color would think that they were someone who would help them? Like, the list just goes on and on and on. And every time I would be taken out of the movie being like, I need context. I need this explained to me. These are all shocking things, which apparently did happen because, again, this is based on a true story. But the movie needs to explain why. Because to modern audiences who aren't familiar with this history, without the context, things happen here that seem to defy all logic. And so it's just very bizarre. When the FBI shows up halfway through the movie, to me, it got a little bit better and more like what one might expect from a Scorsese movie. It got a little bit more like his crime films. I could at least understand the FBI's thought process, and they actually took action and asked questions. You're like, wow, finally, right? And it's nice to see law enforcement portrayed as effective. Now, obviously, tragically, that's not always the case, but sometimes it is. And so, and this is again based on a true story. It did take the FBI disgustingly long to show up and do anything, but they were a new organization at the time, and this was actually the situation that really justified the creation of the FBI. While you needed a federal law enforcement group that could rise above and not be connected to corrupt locals. So, I think that's really great, and that point could have been made even better, quite frankly, in this movie. The actors portraying the FBI are also very good and likable, from Jesse Plemons, always a delight, love Jesse Plemons. But I also liked Pat Healy, Michael Abbott Jr., and Tanaka Means, who was fantastic, as fellow FBI agents. And isn't that fascinating that they had a Native American FBI agent? That's a huge deal. I don't know why the movie didn't talk about that more. If you're going to do things from the perspective of the Native American characters, as this movie claimed that it did, why wasn't the FBI side of the story told from this guy's perspective? I mean, you'd still have Jesse Plemons there as the lead agent, but why aren't we seeing things more from this guy's perspective and what it was like to ride with that team, to be the bridge between the FBI agents and the Native American community they were trying to help? And also, quite frankly, after being surrounded by wall-to-wall idiots for the first half of the movie, it was a joy to have some competent people finally show up. You're like, yes, finally. Now, obviously, Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio are very good and interesting actors to watch. And De Niro, in particular, I was wondering how they did DiCaprio's fake teeth. I was like, he seems to be able to talk so well with them, but they look like they're so bulky. That was crazy. But De Niro, in particular, depicts a very real type of evil not often depicted, and that's one that hides in plain sight, pretending to be good. What a despicable person. However, as William King Hale is portrayed here, he seems like a really obvious villain. Like, you don't watch the movie and go, yeah, I wouldn't have suspected him either. You watch the movie and go, they're like, who do you think's doing this? And you watch the movie and you're like, it's clearly that guy. How are you guys not realizing that? It was very tough to watch. And the fact that he's able to get away with so much, so brazenly, with no explanation as to how, except the movie heavily implying, let's say, the naivete of the Osage people, it's really infuriating and, again, not helpful to the Native American cause. There just had to be more to it, that's how this went down. They just couldn't have been that naive. It doesn't make any sense. At one point, though, an FBI agent remarks that it would be easier to arrest a man for kicking a dog than killing a Native American. A very powerful line, but it was even said off camera, over other visuals. But so it comes across as like a throwaway line. And that's not enough in a movie that is about the tragedy of how these Native Americans were killed. You're like, that should be the whole through line of your movie. And I guess someone would argue, it is. But I think it's just the strokes are so broad and vague that I think only someone already familiar with this story would be able to really be engaged and really follow what's happening without being taken out by you need to tell me more, because that just doesn't make sense. Now, there's a lot of talk about Lily Gladstone's performance, but considering how brave and forceful her character seems in the ad campaign, I was so excited to see her here. A character for the Native American community to be proud of. It is very surprising to see that her character is actually quite the opposite. And since this is based on a true story, and Molly Burkhart actually acted this way, I would like to have gotten some kind of exploration of why she would love her husband so much that it would go against her self-preservation and her preservation and protection of her loved ones. I mean, it was just incredible to see. I mean, Gladstone's performance is very good, and she certainly commands the screen, but it's not a very good role itself. And I think that in this case, I wouldn't say a female writer should have done the entire script, but it wouldn't have. I think it would have really benefited this movie to have a female writer come on and at least work on Molly's part, the part of Molly, to give it more depth and to make her choices make sense to the audience. You're like, again, as I said, it defied logic. It took you out of the movie. Thankfully, as Hollywood tells their stories and stopped casting white actors in the role, a horribly offensive practice in the early days of Hollywood, but since then, since they realized how egregious that was, Hollywood has discovered some fantastic Native American actors, like Lily Gladstone. However, a lot of the other Native American actors in this movie are not good, and in fact, they're not good enough for a theatrical release. Cara Jade Myers, and I feel bad saying this, but she is a very bad actress, which is really a shame because her role is so important. She really is a bad actress. William Below does a very nice job, though, although, again, it would help if the movie made it clear why his character allowed these things to be done with him. I mean, without spoilers, they kind of give a reason, but it's very surfacey. And I think considering how good the actor here is and how tragic his story is, why is more time not spent on them? Gladstone, Below, why did their characters allow these things to be done to them? Why were they so trusting? Why couldn't they help themselves? And also, it's just so sad. Scorsese and DiCaprio insist that this movie isn't told from the white man's perspective, yet white characters still take up the vast majority of the screen time. We should have spent the majority of our time with Gladstone and Below, but yet we don't. And so we don't understand why their characters do the things that they do. And we don't understand, therefore, why anyone's doing the things that they do, except just greed and stupidity and naivete. Brendan Fraser shows up briefly in the third act with a cameo that made my audience laugh because it's just so over the top. Yet unfortunately, as we see even to this day, that's how so many lawyers who represent the guilty conduct themselves, with ridiculous theater to distract. So I think the cameo is actually pretty good. I actually ended up thinking I was like, Brendan Fraser, I can't believe you just won an Oscar, but he made an impression. Then there's the ending of the movie. I'm not going to ruin it, and I hope nobody does for you, but it is a jolt. And it's quite clever. It reminds me of the ending of Napoleon Dynamite, a film that I also felt was poor overall. But the ending was so clever and so interesting and so different. And that's, again, as I've always told you, the impression that people leave the theater with is the one that they'll hold for the entire film, even if it's not deserving. And so I feel that this ending is what's making everybody, I think, particularly like the film. It's very clever and very of the times, considering how popular true crime is these days. And so I believe, as I said, by simply shining a much-needed spotlight on this true, but up to this time ignored true story, combined with this clever ending and discovering Lily Gladstone, that's what's getting Scorsese a lot of goodwill at the film community, even if the actual film has so many issues. However, to me, this clever ending underscores how much more entertaining, how much more illuminating, and how much more justice this true story would be done if the true crime storytelling approach would have been used for the film. That's not what Scorsese does, and it's a shame. So that's my review of Killers of the Flower Moon. At 3.5 hours, unless you're a hardcore cinephile, I would not suggest seeing this in theaters. Some people say they don't feel the running time. I felt the running time. We'll see how it does during awards season, and I do think there will be people who enjoy this film. But I feel Scorsese is skating by on everything but the actual movie that he made. And again, if you're wondering if you will like Killers of the Flower Moon, just realize, don't go in expecting one of Scorsese's crime movies. realize that you're going to go get the other kind of movie. And if that's okay with you, well, then you maybe will enjoy Killers of the Flower Moon. All right, so share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.